The basic issues that were discussed in the previous session were very important, and that helped me to really take this discussion forward. And the issue that has been, which is being discussed on the agrarian reform, is really the need of the hour at this time when the corporate loot is really grabbing all our natural resources at an alarming rate and pushing the people out of their livelihood resources. So it's taking away all the livelihood resources and the source of their livelihoods, which is the only source of survival for the millions and millions of the people who are dependent on these natural resources. I come from All India Union of Forest Work People, and I'm also associated with the peasant struggle and the farmer struggle that is going on in our country since last almost 1 year, under the banner of land rights movement, and it is now dominating our Indian scenario to quite in a very large way. And in that, also the farmers organization, though the issues have not been crystallized as such, but somewhere, the issues that farmers organizations have brought are coming to discuss all those issues at the ground, which is affecting them, and the lands which are getting privatized and were taken over by the corporates, and the three farm laws that is being pushed into the parliament has been strongly opposed by these peasants organization, and they are struggling. And this is the, I think, largest struggle and a very big struggle that is being held in around the national capital of India, New Delhi, where all the farmers are camping since last 1 year, and they are really in large numbers. The government is trying to sabotage, and they are trying to take away and to crush this movement, but they have not been able to. They have not been successful in crushing this movement, and it is spreading in almost all the entire rural areas, and it is talking about the issues of the farming community and the peasant community. But the issue of still the agrarian reform has to surface somewhere, and it will definitely surface in the coming years, as it is evident from the kind of corporate loot that is going on in our country, and by some corporate houses who are trying to take over all the lands that belongs to peasant and the agricultural societies. So it is really very important what has been discussed in the previous session regarding the agrarian societies, and what Peter was talking about in a very systematic fashion, and about the agrarian reform and the territorial excesses and the issues. And that is actually, and I didn't feel that you were talking about Latin American countries. I felt that it is, it is the same thing in India, and you're talking about the Indian situation. So, so it is a very important, I feel that this whole issue of agrarian reform, and according to the livelihood, because they are also, the corporate world and the governments are all trying to digress the issue of agrarian reform also. But we are specifically talking about the people's livelihood, their land in their hand, and the livelihoods of all the agrarian societies, and which includes the forest people, which includes the fisheries, and many societies. So, and I come from a forest rights struggle, and this struggle is also based on saving the and conserving the forest land at the forest area, and which is being very rapidly being taken over by the corporate sector for their the greed and for developing many kind of big industrial projects as coal minings and various kind of power projects which is coming up in these areas, and it is taking over the people's land and their forests. So this is one of the area which is very important. We need to focus, and especially now in the forest areas, we have a very important legislation in 2006, that is the Forest Right Act, that talks about the people's control over the forest, the village councils taking over the forest. But the present regime or the government, previous government also, we had previous the Congress government, and now we have a very right wing government, which is the BJP government. So they are not really interested in implementing such kind of legislation that empowers the people and the village councils, because that will not give the control to the industry and the industrial houses, and they will not be able to grab the lands. So this is the conflict that is which is going on between the farming societies, the peasants, the workers, and the forest people, the fisheries. And a very important aspect is that we are also connected with the workers' movement. And one of our very important constituent is the trade union, independent trade unions, because in this all sector, the workers' right is also connected, be it the agriculture or the forest or the even in the sea, or they connected to the water rights. So the workers' rights is also being ignored, and they are facing a very you can say a kind of denial of their rights, and they have to get they are losing their lands, and they are also losing their jobs. So we are trying to connect all these kind of struggles to build up, and it is really taking a very big shape now in our country. And it is important that such kind of struggles they build up, otherwise the corporate sector is going to take over everything, and make the entire working people into a cheap labor for their industrial purposes. So in this light, I feel that it's very important to really build up this struggle around the world. And we have been propagating the issue of agrarian reforms in our the area of work, and also in this issue, and we have been firmly standing on this issue. And though there have been this issue has been long forgotten, and especially by the political parties and various other organizations. So it is not in the political agenda, but we are definitely trying to bring it as a political issue and the political agenda. And in the coming years, we are very confident that this will become a political issue, the fight. And unless there is a political issue regarding the rights of the peasants, the workers, the forest people, and the people who are involved in the water areas. So this fight will not be very easy. It is a very difficult one, and which will definitely has to be talked, and has to be taken at a very bigger level. And we feel that this issue has to be taken at the South Asian level also, and we are working at the South Asian level in with the countries like Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Pakistan. It's very difficult to communicate, but still, as Comrade from Pakistan was talking about, and the issues that has been raised by him was very, very strong. So this issue needs to be definitely taken up at a global level, and it's a global fight against the very big and giant corporate sector that is bound to take away the people's livelihood and their only main resource. So this has to be a livelihood issue against the big corporate, then only, and this has to be a people's struggle around these issues, then only this we will be able to fight this giant corporate sector. So until this becomes a political issue, it will be very difficult to defeat the corporate agenda across the globe of these big people. So I feel this area is very, very important to talk about nowadays. And we as a All India Union of Forest Working People have taken this agenda, and we are aligning with various other people's movement and the other struggling areas, struggling people, to bring it into a core and the central agenda. I think I will stop here, and maybe I can pitch in later on.
I am incredibly honored to be part of this meeting with all these impressive struggles that I hear about from all over the world. And we are doing that in Europe. I'm from Amsterdam. I'm talking from Amsterdam at this moment. I have to leave in a couple of minutes because at 1 o'clock we start a court. We started ourselves against the Dutch state and a few multinationals that are based in the Netherlands. It's called the Intergenerational Climate Court, and it will be for 4 days. And we will charge the Dutch state and the multinationals Unilever, ING Bank, and Airbus, which presents itself as a airplane producer, but is a weapons manufacturer, in fact, and many more. So, and many of the crimes that we accuse them of are committed against the movements that are taking part in this meeting. It's about land grabbing, about destroying forests, and robbing minerals without paying, and these kind of crimes. So I put a link in the chat. It's with Framer Framed. You can check for the next 4 days. There will be meetings, and you can join and be part of the jury even. But of course, this is not what I was asked to talk about. We are part of a growing movement of housing activists in Europe. And this is because housing has become almost unavailable for many people, especially for poor people. And this has become such a crisis that people start revolting against it and discovering how this is a systemic problem, and that the housing has become a market and has been taken over by international equity funds and private equity and these kind of companies. And what is interesting about these movements is that they also discover that agriculture and other uses of space and land has everything to do with their own personal situation, even in urban settings. So I think many of these movements that are participating now, I know from 20 years ago when we had the global struggles against the WTO and the G8, when these connections were made, more or less, we got to know each other. And I have the feeling that there is a new international movement growing where we can combine struggles and can find each other again. because the companies that are invading our lives, even in the metropoles in Europe, are being disclosed as having this influence all over the world. And the movements, this is a good thing, I think, are growing very strong. I don't know if you heard about news, for instance, in Berlin, they had a referendum a few weeks ago where a majority of the voters voted to socialize housing of big housing companies. And this is unprecedented. This never happened before. I mean, it's not a law yet, but it puts very much pressure on progressive governments to do something about the housing crisis. Struggles are interconnecting. Another good example is the ZAD in France, where huge movements of people coming from cities, but also farmers together stopped the building of an airport. And this whole area is now occupied in a way and is being used for as well building communities as farming. So these alliances are being made in the practice. It is happening now, and I think it is a real good possibility for also to learn to explain to ourselves, let's say, and people participating, how capitalism functions and what these incredible economic forces are doing all over the world. Of course, it is not a paradise or something. It's not happening automatically. There's many people joining these demonstrations. For instance, in the Netherlands, we had 2 huge demonstrations against the housing crisis. One with 15,000 people in Amsterdam, and 2 weeks ago, almost 10,000 people in Rotterdam. And many of the participants, they join because they just want a house, but something is happening there, and we are learning to struggle again, and we are learning about how capitalism functions, and but also about how government functions. Because in the case of Amsterdam, for instance, we have a progressive government, but they do not hesitate to evict squatters and to send riot cops to actions. And we have one specific case here that is a really clear connection between struggle for land, for farming, and a housing activist, which is called the Lutkemeer. I put the link also in the chat. This is a piece of agrarian land that has been confiscated by the government to build a distribution center for a big corporation. In this case, it is going to be for Ahold, which is the holding company for a supermarket chain, the biggest supermarket in the Netherlands, Albert Heijn. And we are trying to stop this. The link is in the chat. If people all over the world would like to show solidarity, that would help us very much. Take contact with me. If you need more information, or the website, but that is mostly in Dutch, so that will be maybe difficult. And the other way around, if we can show solidarity or do actions for the struggle that is connected, then let us know, and that way we can develop international solidarity like it should be. I don't know. This is more or less what there's much more I could tell about the developing housing struggle in Europe. But maybe that's better for a different, separate event, because it's so specific, and also each country has different developments. Yeah, that's more or less my message.
I'm Amparo, Miciano, and I heard the previous speakers, and it seems that we have some issues are common, like for example, the airport, as mentioned earlier. That is a big issue also in the Philippines, because thousands of hectares of land will be converted to agricultural land converted to an airport. Anyway, I'm from the PKKK, or the Pambansang Koalisyon ng Kababaihan sa Kanayunan. It's a national rural women coalition, and we've been pushing for rural women's rights and empowerment for the past 17 years. We were organized in 2003. And we have this dream, or our goal, that food producers shall not go hungry. In the last year, when there was a lockdown, a few months after the announcement or the imposition of the lockdown, we asked our members, mostly our members are farmers, fishers, Indigenous women, and we asked them how they were. Are they able to eat 3 times a day, or are they healthy? And they said that they're able to eat because they have grown crops that like root crops, vegetables, and that's what they consume as food. But after a year and 6 months of community quarantine or lockdown, by the way, the Philippines holds the title of the longest ever under lockdown. I think these answers have changed. Actually, we have members who have asked for help for food, and that's very, very sad. We believe that we have the capacity to feed ourselves, especially if we are guaranteed control over the resources and technology required to produce food. Hence, we continue to assert our rights to land and water resources. We assert agroecology as a sustainable way in farming and protecting our environment. One of our members, Paragos Pilipinas, and a member of LAVIA, Campesina, has been pushing for legislative measures that will permanently protect the 143 watersheds in the Philippines that support agricultural irrigation systems. This signifies our outlook about people not going hungry is beyond the day-to-day survival, but rather for a long term. We women are intent on passing to another generation a legacy of sustainable, pro-environment, and pro-people agricultural policies and practices. We have constantly pushed for strategic engagements, such as the filing of legal petition to follow up on the more than 100,000 hectares backlog of the Department of Agrarian Reform. Unfortunately, the pandemic lockdown has delayed even further the serving of notices of coverage for the undistributed lands. And as mentioned earlier by Danny Carranza, also from the Philippines, Katarungan, he said that the current administration does not put agrarian reform as a priority, as shown in the budget allotted for agrarian reform. We have also engaged in the legislative hearings and joining mobilizations that call out the disaster that is the rice tariffication law. The liberalization in agriculture and food has practically wiped out the income and lives of our local food producers. For women, the worsening poverty in the rural areas had pushed many women to venture into other high-risk jobs in the urban centers and even overseas. This relates to the protection of territories, mainly because with little incentive to produce, many farmers are basically forced to sell their lands. And of course, this liberalization policies has a lot to do with it. The neglect by government is greatly felt by women peasants. This is why very recently, in the time for the International Rural Women's Day, we gave the Department of Agriculture our feedback and demand on the recognition of peasant women in the registry system. We have gathered evidence on the systemic discrimination of women by rendering them invisible in the farming and fishing sectors. Again, this is very important because we have finally asserted that women should be treated equally in agrarian reform. So equal status that will ensure access to programs should also be assured as well. Other initiatives related to the protection of territories that PKKK has pushed for in its rural women agenda is on opposing mining and other extractive industries. We have also opposed fossil fuel power plants that are not only worsen global warming, but also being put up in agricultural and forest lands and contaminating our coastal resources. For the indigenous women, the non-Moro women in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao continue to protect and assert their ancestral land even to this day. Amidst armed conflict and displacement, they hold their ground and identities, and PKKK supports them as well in various ways, from small projects to leadership training and community food production activities. The lack of recognition and support from government have put them in a position of vulnerability. Sorry for the background. I'm near a highway. This cropping season, many have again risked resorting to loan sharks to avail of farming inputs, especially the seeds. Several times, we've heard the importance of mobilizing seed companies to support our farmers in this time of pandemic. But what we really love to hear, however, is to mobilize support for our local farmers to help them preserve, select, and bank indigenous seeds. Seed banking is a must, and now we're starting a campaign to again regain the peasants' control, especially the peasant women, over the preservation of these seeds. Specifically, we are going back to an inventory of these seeds, starting with clusters of women, much like self-help group savings, not money, but rather saving seeds. We have started the inventory and sharing of seeds in around 10 provinces already. Supporting community-based seed banking requires a policy environment that supports food sovereignty and a broader appreciation of food as integral to health. We are pushing for localized food self-sufficiency plans. The health pandemic taught us a great lesson that not being hungry means we need to have a shorter supply chain from the producers to the consumers. We need to be able to supply at least our own basic needs. We articulate that food is integral to the ongoing health crisis. If we are able to communicate this clearly, we establish a role as part of the solution and recovery in our respective countries. Food is not just about hunger, it is also about overcoming COVID-19. We continue to organize and animate the democratic spaces in our communities, coming from a country that passed the anti-terrorism law at the height of the pandemic, just as what Danny also shared a while ago. We need to constantly oppose fascist, sexist rule, especially now that we are at the helm of another national elections. And we are actively involved in the national elections to make sure that we will have a national rulers who are not violators of our basic human rights and freedoms. So if we are to believe that small food producers shall not be hungry again, we shall have to act and look at small food producers as not too gullible to be fed by failed promises of neoliberal policies and state actors acting as bullies. Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity.
I want to say that being together is definitely a critical thing. It's critical because we need to go together and do our path together. The problem is that when we talk about this kind of working together in a job that is also a way of life that is peculiarly individual, this is problematic. I'm here on behalf of a European Shepherds Network and an Italian Shepherds Network also, and on WAMIP, as we said. But most of all, I'm here as a daughter, granddaughter, and shepherd myself, and try to give voice wherever I can to those who are right now working. So not everyone can go and give its own speech. So this is fundamental to remember. We are here on behalf of so many people that don't have access to communication and don't have time to leave their animals and to do some other jobs that are very fundamental, such as this of giving a feedback about what is going on. I also want to say that it's complicated, of course. This is common for shepherds, but also for peasants, to put yourself in a different light, on a different stage. But we have to be strong and not to be worried about presenting ourselves as we are. I just want to give some inputs about what it means for us being shepherds and what is transhumance. We are a transhumant. That means that we've got a flock of sheep and we go around. We don't have a place where to keep our animals, just one place. We have to move. We move from the higher mountains in the Alps in the summertime, and then we move all along in the winter. And for us, as Italian shepherds, but also this is something extremely common to everyone, movement is the key, because this kind of work is sustainable because it uses marginal resources. We use what left from other production, what is by peasant left on the fields, then our animal can eat that. And so we produce something which is the meat and the milk products of our animals, thanks to what is left from other production. But as movement is the key, we are experiencing very, very big issues concerning the possibility of movement. So the loss of green networks we've got in Europe, but it's the same all around the world. We've got more and more buildings and less green connection. So when you have to move a flock of animals, you have to somehow invade places that are already invading your old place. And more we try to, we are in peripheral area, in facing urbanization every day. Then, of course, our movement disturbs those who have already invaded our area, and we get some transit bans. This means that municipalities say that we are not allowed to be there, or we have just to move along, we cannot stop. But if you have animals, you know that the time you're given, it's not chosen by you, it's chosen by the situation, by the weather, by what your animals feel like doing it. I wanted to add that the pandemic also created more and more problems because, of course, because of the lockdown, we were also not allowed, many of us were not allowed to cross borders that we normally cross, which are administrative borders, which have nothing to do with what we usually do. And this is for me in Europe, but it's the same for the fellow shepherds in Asia or in Africa. I didn't mention it before, but what I've learned taking part to these kind of meetings is that maybe it's different. The color of the grass, I'm going with my animals, but the basic issue I'm facing are completely the same of what we are doing. So there's no difference at all. And pandemic blocked us all. They blocked also the market where we deliver our food, and so there was no market for us. in Italy, we also are facing some problems concerning the access to higher pastures land, because bigger companies are beating better prices to the rent of those lands, and smallholders cannot afford those kind of money, and so they're step outside. If you cannot go to the better pastures, how can you improve your flock? Basically, in summer, it's the time where your animals can get fatter, can get better. But if that's taken out of you, also the winter is difficult to go along with it. Then I think this is the most important point, is that what comes out is that food sovereignty is not in a European priority, because now animal production is just seen as a relatable produce of husbandry. There are green services that are taken into consideration, but food sovereignty, food production is not a key issue. And this is why, for instance, our needs as shepherds are taken on a second step. And first of all, wildlife is considered as fundamental to protect. And second, tourism. But it's never shepherd with their means of production, never. Production, husbandry, agriculture comes afterward. Afterward, wildlife, afterward, tourism. But no one understands that this kind of wildlife, this kind of landscape, and therefore this kind of tourism exists just because there is someone who preserves landscape as it is. Then, of course, the other big thing is that we are proposed new models of lifestyle, new models of managing our animals. They don't want no government want people to move along, because movement is freedom, and freedom has to be blocked, has to be checked, has to be controlled. And so we are forced to answer to more administrative burdens, to more unnecessary health control, which doesn't help to move along and to take care of the health of your animals. And if you block freedom, if you block movement, you block extensive production, extensive agriculture, and this means you lead to intensive agriculture, which is something not everyone can afford, and it's not sustainable. The other two struggles that personally we're not facing in Italy, but are for sure a question that goes all along with other fellow shepherds, are the preservation of cultural priorities, cultural determination, which of course, when you take away animals from people and you don't let them roaming as they use, there is also a cultural loss, and also gender balance and the possibility to let women to work as a shepherd, to keep their own animal and to preserve their freedom, to preserve the possibility and the opportunity to let them feed their family. When we give up to all of this, we give up to very big thing, which is freedom, first of all, and food sovereignty. This is it, because I think it's better to have some key points of our struggle. Of course, if you want to deepen some question, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.